The Senate will come to order. Mr. Carpenter, please call the roll.
Senators Bridges, Cook, Coram, Court, Crowder, Danielson, Donovan, Finberg, Fields, Foote, Gardner, Janal, Gonzalez, Hill, Heisey, Holbert, Lee, Lundeen, Marble, Moreno, Pedersen, Priola, Rankin, Rodriguez, Scott, Smallwood, Sonnenberg, Story, Tate, Todd, Williams, Winter, Woodward, Zenzinger. Mr. President.
Here, with 35 present, 0 absent, 0 excused, we have a quorum. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we suspend Senate Rule 1B to allow a person other than a senator to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and Senate will suspend Rule 1B. Members, this morning I'm honored to recognize Elijah Ariano to lead our Pledge of Allegiance. He is joined by his dad, Juan, just turned 12 years old. His parents tell me that he's a 4.0 student at Stewart Middle School in Commerce City and a martial arts master, plays basketball, and is a fan of Spider-Man. Thank you so much, and please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I would like for everybody to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Approval of the journal. Senator Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the reading of the journal of Friday, April 12th, 2019 be dispensed with and that the journal be approved as corrected by the Secretary.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Committee reports.
April 12th, 2019, Committee on Judiciary. After consideration, Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 222, be amended as follows as amended before Committee on Appropriations of favorable recommendation. April 12th, 2019, Committee on Judiciary. After consideration, Mayor's Committee as following. Senate Bill 223, be amended as follows as amended, be referred to Committee on Appropriations of favorable recommendation.
Senate Services.
Greco and Gross, Senate Bill 59, 61, 104, 135, 142, 143, 150, 153, 157, 161, 169, 172, 192, 197, 202, 219, 220, and 221. Correctly and Senate Bill 160, 163, 179, 229, 230. Correctly revised, House Bill 1232. Correctly revised, House Bill 1010, 1025, 1092, 1149, 1220. Correctly enrolled, Senate Bill 207.
Introduction and resolutions. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to HJR 1012.
House Joint Resolution 1012 by Representatives Valdez D. and Senator Garcia concerning the designation of Colorado State Highway 115 between mile markers 7 and 10.34 through the city of Florence as the Sergeant First Class Ray and Marshalletta Memorial Highway.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Joint Resolution 1012 lay over 1 day under the rules until tomorrow, April 16th.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. And HJR 1012 will be laid over until April 16, 2019. Third reading of bills. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, there has been a request to remove Senate Bill 169 from the consent calendar.
Senate Bill 169 will be removed from the consent calendar. Members and staff, we're going to proceed to third reading. Third reading of bills, consent calendar. Mr. Carpenter, please read all the titles on the third reading consent calendar.
House Bill 1232 by Representatives Gonzalez, Gutierrez, and Catlin, Stearns, Corman, Rodriguez, concerning the alignment of compliance with the Federal Indian Child Welfare Act. Senate Bill 59 by Senator Moreno and Representative Bugner, concerning creation of an automatic enrollment in advanced courses grant program in the Department of Education in connection with making an appropriation. Senate Bill 61 by Senator Tate and Representative Arden Hooten, concerning standards for the certification of certain types of respirators equipped with pressure vessels in connection with making an appropriation. Senate Bill 104 by Senators Holbert and Foote and Representatives Baisley and Gray, concerning the elimination of the duplicate regulation of property of a school district charter school or institute charter school. Senate Bill 142 by Senator Donovan and Representative McCluskey, concerning the exclusion of hard cider from the Colorado Wine Industry Development Act in connection with making an appropriation. Senate Bill 150 by Senators Donovan and Sonnenberg and Representative Monteo, concerning the continuation of the regulation of public livestock markets in connection with implementing the recommendations contained in the 2018 Sunshine Report by the Department of the Regulatory Agency. Senate Bill 153 by Senator Fields and Representative Kipp, concerning the continuation of the Colorado Podiatry Board in connection with implementing the recommendations contained in the 2018 Sunset Report by the Department of the Regulatory Agency. Senate Bill 157 by Senator Winter and Representative Cutter, concerning the continuation of the fire suppression programs of the Division of Fire Prevention and Control and the Department of Public Safety in connection with implementing the recommendations contained in the 2018 Sunset Report by the Department of the Regulatory Agency. Senate Bill 161 by Senators Bridges and Story and Representative Kipp, concerning the continuation of the State Advisory Council for Parent Involvement in Education in connection with implementing the recommendations contained in the 2018 Sunset Report by the Department of Regulatory Agencies and making an appropriation. Senate Bill 172 by Senators Danielson and Janan, Representative Singer, concerning crimes related to an at-risk person in connection with creating the crimes of unlawful abandonment and unlawful confinement, making an appropriation. Senate Bill 197 by Senators Zenzinger and Representative Kennedy, concerning the continuation of the pilot program to allow an eligible person with a spinal cord injury to receive complementary alternative medicine. Senate Bill 219 by Senator Pedersen and Representative Gonzalez Gutierrez, concerning the continuation of the Colorado Licensing of Controlled Substances Act in connection with implementing the recommendations contained in the 2018 Sunset Report by the Department of the Regulatory Agency. Senate Bill 221 by Senator Donovan and Representative Roberts, concerning the funding of Colorado Water Conservation Board projects in connection therewith, making an appropriation.
Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the passage of all the bills in the third reading of bills consent calendar, which includes House Bill 1232 and Senate Bills 59, 61, 104, 142, 150, 153, 157, 161, 172, 197, 219, as well as Senate Bill 221.
Is there any discussion on any of the bills? Seeing none, the motion is the passage of all the bills on the third reading bills consent calendar. Are there any no votes? Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to be recorded as a no vote on Senate Bill 153.
Senator Marble will be recorded as a no vote. Mr. Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also ask to be recorded as a no vote on Senate Bill 153.
Minority Leader will be recorded as a no vote on Senate Bill 153. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excuse, House Bill 1232 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Crowder, Janal, Fields, Court, Cook, Priola, Williams, Tate, Gonzalez, with a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excuse, Senate Bill 59. Please add Senator Todd as a co-sponsor on House Bill 1232. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excuse, Senate Bill 059 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Zenzinger, Winter, Donovan, Gonzalez, Bridges, Majority Leader, Court, Fields, Todd, Story, Priola, Rodriguez, Janal, Tate, Rankin, Woodward, Cook, Lundin, Pedersen. Please add the president. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 061 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senator Smallwood. Senators Crowder. Priola. Danielson. Janal. Bridges. Todd. Winter. Moreno. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 104 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Crowder, Woodward, Cook, Smallwood, Rankin, Sonnenberg, Scott, Priola, Heisey, Tate. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 142 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Marble, Bridges, the Majority Leader, Winter, Story, Woodward, Fields, Tate, Priola, Moreno, with a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 150 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senator Crowder, Senator Tate, Senators Gonzalez, Cook, Priola, Woodward, Rankin, Scott, Todd, with a vote of, please add Senator Court. With a vote of 33 ayes, 2 no votes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 153 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Tate, with a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 157 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senator Crowder, Senator Tate, Senator Priola, Senator Donovan, Senators Janal, Pedersen, Story, Todd, Gonzalez, with a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 161 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Winter, Zenzinger, Rankin, Tate, Court, Moreno, Todd, Priola, Gonzalez, with a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 172 is passed. Co-sponsors. Members, we are on 172 because 169 was requested to be moved from the consent calendar. Please follow. Co-sponsors on 172. Senators Crowder, Bridges, Winter, Pedersen, Court, Priola, Rankin, Todd, Story, Pedersen, Zenzinger, Williams, Lee, Foote, please add the president. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 197. Excuse me. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 197 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Todd, Moreno, Crowder, Winter, Janal, Story, Woodward, Tate, Gonzalez, Pedersen, Danielson, Lee. Please add the president. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 219 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Winter, Williams, Tate, Todd, Bridges. Please add the president. With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 221 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Bridges, Gonzalez, Moreno, Zenzinger, Williams, Winter, Crowder, Story, Janal, Todd, Fields, Sonnenberg, Priola, Quorum, Cook, Scott, Tate, Pedersen, Court. Please add the president. Third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 135.
Senate Bill 135 by Senators Williams and Rodriguez and Representatives Buckner and Bunteo, concerning methods to determine whether disparities involving certain historically underutilized businesses exist within the state procurement process in connection therewith, commissioning a study to make such determination, requiring the Department of Personnel to track contracts awarded to historically underutilized businesses and making an appropriation.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Bill 19135 on third reading and final passage and ask you for an aye vote.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 135 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? Senators Cook, the Minority Leader, Marble, Lundin, Heisey, Sonnenberg, Woodward, Gardner, Smallwood, Scott, Hill. With a vote of 24 ayes, 11 no votes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 135 is passed. Co-sponsors: Senators Winter, Bridges, please add the president. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 143.
Senate Bill 143 by Senators Gonzalez and Lee and Representative Herod, concerning changes related to parole release to alleviate prison population issues.
Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 143 on third reading of bills, final passage, and ask for an aye vote.
Is there any discussion? Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I have been a no vote on this in committee and appropriations. It has been changed and amended. It is, as every bill that we pass, not a perfect bill, but it is a reasonable approach for what is our difficulties in prison populations, both in dealing with parole and rehabilitation, and for that reason, I will be an aye vote on second reading, or on third reading, rather.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 143 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? Senator Crowder, Senator Hill, Senator Lundin, Senator Sonnenberg, with a vote of 31 ayes, 4 no votes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 143 is passed. Co-sponsors, Mr. Majority Leader, Senators Winter, Todd, Moreno, Foote, Court, Tate, Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 192.
Senate Bill 192 by Senators Winter and Pula and Representative Jackson concerning the creation of an enterprise that is exempt from the requirements of Section 20 of Article 10 of the state constitution to administer a fee-based waste diversion grant program.
Senator Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 192 on third reading and final passage.
Is there any discussion? Senator Priol.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members, it's an honor for me to run this bill, Senate Bill 192, with the good senator from Adams County. In the spirit of President Lincoln, who established Yosemite, in the spirit of President Grant, who established Yellowstone National Park, and in the spirit of President Nixon, who established the EPA, I am proud to run this bill that will clean up the messes in eastern Adams County and other parts of this Front Range for our grandchildren. This is a strong bill that sunsets in 10 years to do what capitalist societies do and clean up their messes. I ask for an aye vote.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 192 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? Senators Sonnenberg, Marble, Minority Leader, Cook, Heisey, Lundin, Hill, Woodward, Gardner, Smallwood, Rankin, Scott, Tate, Donovan. With a vote of 21 ayes, 14 no votes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 192 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Court, Foote, Williams, Moreno, Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 202.
Senate Bill 202 by Senators Danielson and Zinzinger and Representative Froelich concerning ballot access for voters with disabilities in connection with making an appropriation.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the passage of Senate Bill 202 on third reading and final passage.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 202 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 202 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Foote, Winter, Court, Williams, Heisey, Crowder, Todd, Janal, Patterson, Story, Bridges, Fields, Majority Leader, Smallwood, Tate, Gonzalez, Gardner, Moreno. Please have the President. Donovan, Lundin. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 220.
Senate Bill 220 by Senators Marble and Fenberg and Representative Sain and Arndt concerning updates to the Industrial Hemp Regulatory Program administered by the Commissioner of Agriculture to align the program with the regulatory requirements set forth in the Federal Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018 in connection with making an appropriation.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. President. We move Senate Bill 220 on third reading and final passage and ask for an aye vote.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 220 on third reading and final passage. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 220 is passed. Co-sponsors, Senators Bridges, the Minority Leader, Quorum, Crowder, Heisey, Sonnenberg, Gonzalez, Janal, Todd, Woodward, Smallwood, Rankin, Fields, Court, Priola, Scott, Story, Donovan, Patterson, Moreno, Tate, Please add the president. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title to Senate Bill 169.
Senate Bill 169 by Senators Tate and Bridges and Representative Martin concerning project management competencies for certain state contracts.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 169 on third reading and request permission to run a third reading amendment.
Senator Tate, can you please tell us your request on why you would request permission to offer a third reading amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The amendment comes about with me being excused on Friday. The bill came to third reading with great celerity, going through appropriations and second reading on Friday without me here. Therefore, we have a little cleanup. The amendment basically requests.
Senator Tate, before you go into the technical aspects of a third reading amendment, the question before the body is to first grant permission to offer a third reading amendment. The question before the body, it requires, this is not a 2/3, so fortunate for you, Senator Tate, you are in good standing. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and permission is granted. Will the clerk please read Amendment L004?
Amendment L004, Senate Bill 169 by Senator Tate and Gross, Bill page 2, line 3.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move L004 to Senate Bill 169.
To the amendment, Senator.
Members, thank you, Mr. President. The amendment asks that project managers in the budgeting and scoping function survey other states that have completed similar major IT projects to find out what they've learned, I guess, is the simplest way to put it. Ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment answers questions that come up constantly when we're seeing these proposals in the Joint Tech Committee. We say, why are you going to use this solution? Aren't there other solutions in other states? We just want to make sure we don't have to ask that question, that is part of the proposal that they come to us with. Government needs to be efficient, effective, and responsive. This entire bill gets to that, and this piece really hammers home that point. So we ask for your support of the amendment and the bill.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is adoption of Amendment L004 to Senate Bill 169. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, 0 excused, Amendment L004 is adopted. To the bill, Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just refer the members of the body to the comments made by my colleagues some moments ago.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion before the body is the passage of Senate Bill 169. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, Senate Bill 169 is passed. Co-sponsors. Senators Gardner, Rankin, Woodward, the Minority Leader. General orders, second reading of bills. Senator Foote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the consideration of general orders, second readings of bills.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The motion is adopted and the Senate will resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole for consideration of general orders, second reading of bills, and Senator Foote will take the chair.
The committee will come to order and the code rule is relaxed. Mr. Carpenter, Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 196 lay over to the bottom of General Order, second reading of bills calendar.
Seeing no objection, 196 will be moved to the bottom of the General Order, second readings of bills calendar. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title of House Bill 1118.
House Bill 1118 by Representative Jackson, Glenn, and Senator Williams, concerning the time allowed for a tenant to cure a lease violation that is not a substantial violation.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1911-18 on second reading of bills.
And to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, House Bill 1911-18 is to extend a notice for a tenant before eviction. And currently, the eviction process, the FED was of a forcible entry and detainer action in court must be given to the tenant with a written lease violation that is taken place with the landlord's intent to evict the tenant if the issue is not remedied. This is now a 3-day notice, and it states that a tenant must cure the lease violation or vacate the property within 3 days. If the tenant is able to remedy the lease violation within this period, they can remain in their homes. If they fail to do so, the landlord may file an eviction. And the current law does not allow sufficient time to remedy a lease or pay the full amount of the overdue rent in the case of a financial emergency. This is such a short time frame, and it undermines the effectiveness of existing rental assistance programs. And so what this bill will do is it'll extend the notice that required before a landlord can file an eviction for a non-substantial lease violation from unpaid rent from 3 days to 10 days. This will ensure that the tenant has an efficient time to address the complaint. This would not preclude the landlord from charging and collecting late fees. I think it's also important because many have had concerns that if there is an eviction process, if the behavior endangers the safety or the property of the landlord or another tenant, or when they are committing a criminal defense, this does not apply to that. And so, members, we know we have a lot of housing issues out there, and we are attempting through House Bill 1118 to ensure that if there are tenants who may face a financial crisis, we all have emergencies that occur in life, and we want to keep tenants in their homes. We think that 10 days is reasonable. We started at 14 days, and we were able to negotiate down to 10 days. This will also allow those who may need some type of financial assistance time to reach out to organizations that can provide that assistance in helping them stay in their homes. That's what this is all about. We want to keep people in their homes. We want to keep them out of poverty. We want to keep them out of homelessness. And this is about supporting families and strengthening communities. Evictions are just disastrous for both, and it can have a domino effect on a person's life, leading to job loss, poverty, homelessness, and instability for families. And so I would ask you for an aye vote on House Bill 1118.
And there is an amendment at the desk. Mr. Carpenter, please read L035.
Amendment L035, House Bill 11.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, this amendment L035 is to address some concerns that we heard here in this chamber and outside of it. And what it does, it allows single-family residences, and if a landlord owns 5 or less residences, then they are exempt. I call it the 5-5 amendment, so anything less than 5 or less will be carved out, and this will not be applicable. However, the time to cure a lease would be 5 days, so this is different from the bill itself, but this will allow a leasing agreement with a single-family who owns 5 or fewer single-family rental homes, and also provide notice to their tenants about this 5 days. So it's the 5 and 5. Again, those landlords who own 5 or less single-family residences, and 5 days to cure a lease for the tenants. And I would ask you for an aye vote on this amendment.
Is there any further discussion on L035? Seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of L035. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. L035 is adopted. To the bill. Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I want to talk maybe about why I think the bill's a bad idea. I'll bring that up for a little bit, and then I have an amendment I'll offer as well. One of the challenges we face here in Colorado is we've seen it. We've seen the growing rents. We see they're bouncing kind of on the ceiling of where rents could possibly be in an urban area. And this is, I'll get in trouble for saying this, so I'll announce it to the whole world so you can videotape this. This is a good problem to have. Detroit does not have a problem with skyrocketing rents. Many other cities in the nation don't have a problem with skyrocketing rents. The problem we have on rents is because Colorado has been so economically successful in recent decades. And it's one of these challenges that I think demands our attention and demands our discussion about what good policy should be based on that. My concern here is that this bill actually does not approach this in a helpful way. We actually, with 1118, are going to be making rent even more expensive. And not just rent more expensive, but the process of renting more expensive. I know for years we've heard discussions. We've had bills come up in committees about limiting the rental application fee, about what you could and couldn't ask on a rental application. And all of this was designed to hopefully make it easier for people to get into a rental situation that works for them. This bill makes it harder. This bill makes it harder for those same people to get into a rental unit. And here's why. Here's how this works. I think we're all in agreement about exactly what we're doing here. We are extending the time before we can initiate eviction procedures. And it's a short bill. There's no question about that. The challenge is all business, everything that we do is risk versus return, that by saying we're going to give more time for a resident, for a tenant to stay in a unit, we have to acknowledge we're increasing the cost to the landlord for that unit. And everyone who's talked to a landlord, I spent the weekend talking to some landlords down in the Springs just to get a better sense of how this works. Nobody wants to evict. Evicting is, at the end of the day, it's a money-losing situation for a landlord. And no tenant wants to get evicted either. I think we recognize the tenant side of it. I don't think we've sufficiently acknowledged the landlord side of what a losing economic proposition eviction actually is. But by pushing this out, by pushing it out, really we're moving it from 3 days up to 10 days before you can start the procedure. By pushing it out, we're saying we're increasing the potential cost on any landlord. They know now that anytime I get into a situation as a landlord, they are going to have if an eviction comes about or is going to be needed, they're going to have an increased cost of that. And so any good economic actor in this situation is going to go back and say, well, to handle the risk, the potential of increased cost, I need to deal with that on the front end. And so I'm going to increase the cost of the application in the first place. I'm going to do a better job of weeding out those who might potentially be at risk of non-payment, be at risk of needing to be evicted. And so really all we're doing is we're shifting the tail and the cost of the eviction, the tail end of this rental process, up to the front end. And we're making it even harder for people to get in, and we say, oh no, we're just trying to help folks. But the reality is someone has to absorb this cost. Someone has to absorb the cost. And even if we don't absorb the cost on a rental application fee, even if we don't absorb the cost on the questions that get asked about that potential tenant, that cost will get absorbed in a few extra dollars of rent a month. A few extra, I don't know, maybe it's $20, maybe it's $30, but that cost has to be absorbed somewhere, and we haven't dealt with that in this bill. I think we have good intentions on this bill, but we haven't dealt with the cost, and the end result of what we're doing is we're actually just going to be making it harder for the people we say we're trying to help, and that's why, Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer and move Amendment 37.
An amendment is at the desk. Mr. Carpenter, please read L037.
Amendment L037, House Bill 1118 by Senator Hill and
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, if there is any confusion, I would like to offer, and I do move Amendment 37.
037 has formally been moved. Senator Hill.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, here's what 37 does. 37, I think, actually does a good job of addressing both sides of this challenging equation. I know it's a big change to the bill, but right now the way the bill works is it says a landlord has to wait 10 days until they can file eviction proceedings, which means it takes another 14 days for that hearing to happen, which means from the time of deciding on an eviction to a hearing on that, we're looking at 24 days. The challenge of 24 days, that's almost a full month. That's a full month's rent, and you think, hey, on average rents, even if we're just talking about $1,200, that $1,200 now needs to be absorbed in the other 11 months out of the year. So that's going to be spread further out. What this amendment does is it says, hey, you still have the 3 days that you currently have. However, we're giving time to cure for those 14 days until the hearing happens. So it means in all practicality, you will have 17 full days for a tenant to make right with the landlord and to figure these things out. Right now we have 3 days. This amendment would move that out to 17 days. And it goes a step further. It goes a step further because it addresses a concern that I have. It addresses a challenge that I mentioned in my maybe overly wordy explanation before getting to this amendment. But if you look at section B there, starting at line 21, it now says that just because you filed doesn't mean in the future you cannot use the filing of an eviction order against that person in future rental applications. So it means if you come into some tough times, you make it right, you get right with your landlord, you figure it out, it means that eviction is not a matter of public record going forward. So it solves two problems. One is it actually gives more time than we currently have, a lot more time. It solves much of the cost problem in terms of saying we've got to push this back out and absorb these costs in another way for a landlord. And it says, something we don't currently have in law right now, you cannot use eviction orders going forward based on this process against potential new tenants. So it addresses the problem of folks who may be in and out of different rental situations, not allowing these eviction orders to be used against them. Colleagues, I know we've got some partisan moments that we have down here, and I think that's just, it's part of the system we have set up. I think this is actually, this does a good job of taking arguments from both sides of our political spectrum and moves us forward in a way that would actually work within the context of our challenging rental market right now. Again, the problem that we have because Colorado has been so economically successful. I look forward to some debate on this amendment and ask for your support.
To the amendment, further discussion. Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you heard the senator from Colorado Springs indicated that he felt like this was a good problem to have. I beg to differ on that. This is not a good problem to have. I represent a community, and oftentimes I will see an eviction notice on their door. I've seen their contents of what was inside that apartment thrown out on the front yard. This is not a good problem to have. People all across the state of Colorado are struggling as it relates to affordable housing. And once you get evicted, it's not a good problem to have. It's not a good problem. It creates all kinds of other dilemmas. So what this amendment will do, and you heard the bill sponsor already mention the amount of days. This doesn't do anything to help that tenant at all. Once you're evicted from your home and you have to try to find another place, it's not that easy. This is not a good problem to have. So what this amendment will do will make things much more complicated for that tenant. But what House Bill 1118 does, it provides a little relief. It's doing the right thing. And what this amendment will do will push us back to what we already have, and it creates much more trauma and issues for that tenant. So members, please, vote no on this amendment.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for those comments from my colleague from Arapahoe County. And members, what L037 basically is asking for is to go back to last year's version of the bill, where we negotiated and worked with stakeholders on allowing a tenant to be able to cure that rent before the court date is set. And what I'm concerned about is that this bill failed last year, and for those of you who want to go back to last year's version, I don't understand what's different about this year and why that wasn't accepted last year when we tried to protect those who are being evicted. But what I will share with you is that 7 days is 10 days is going to be more reasonable right now, and we've moved from 14 days. And by having a moving date and having the tenant and the landlord not know when that court date is going to be can cause confusion. As a sponsor, I feel like 10 days is solid. Both sides will know. You have 10 days to cure your rent before the eviction notice is filed. And also in this amendment, it says that a landlord or any other person shall not use an action by the landlord. Now, how are we going to monitor this? This is a complicated process. And when a notice would show up on a tenant's record, it automatically comes up on the screen. There is nothing that says we're going to clear your record and tell anyone how to be accountable about not using this in the event that the tenant has a ding on their record that they were late. There was an eviction. So this is another obstacle that we cannot allow to happen because there's no way to monitor whether a landlord would use this information on a person moving forward for the tenant. And so I'm going to strongly ask you for a no vote on L037.
Further discussion on Amendment 037. Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the bill sponsors for bringing this. I would urge you members to think about 3 groups of people that this bill affects. The bill is focused specifically on one group of people. That's people who may face eviction. And it's trying to get a pathway that is more comfortable, more understandable, quite frankly, longer, substantially longer in their behalf. But there's 2 other groups of people that we need to consider. And that's one of the traps we fall into so frequently here as we write public policy. We come with a bill to get at an issue, and it gets at that issue, but it gets at a bunch of other issues that affect a bunch of other people. And we need to consider those other groups of people. Now, you've heard a little bit of discussion around the second group of people, and that's landlords. Now, they deserve to have a give and take, a balance that we should seek in the process of solving this problem. And that's important because the landlords, the investors who choose to put money at risk, to put roofs over people's heads, should not be unnecessarily discouraged from doing exactly that. We want to have more apartments available. We want to have more homes available. And if we do things that unnecessarily restrict and make it difficult to invest money in order to do that on behalf of people, you know what happens? The apartments don't get built. The growing population of Colorado competes for the remaining apartments that are available, and the prices go up and up and up. And if you think they're unaffordable now, wait until you start to restrict the flow of money into the development of projects to put roofs over people's heads. And that's, in fact, absent this amendment, exactly what I believe this bill will do, which is why this amendment is such an important balance. But let's talk about the third group of people that I mentioned that would be so dramatically and negatively affected by this bill without this amendment. In Colorado today, we have about 420,000 apartments for people to live in. Less than 10% of those apartments are what we're discussing here. It's less than 10% of the individuals on an annual basis that fall into eviction proceedings, that fall into a challenge and difficulty. The other 90% of the people, the forgotten men, women, and children of Colorado who will be pinched, who will have more difficulty finding a roof to put over their head, are the folks we should be thinking about. And I would argue that this amendment, Amendment 37, does exactly that. It says, let's consider everyone in this conversation. Let's consider the 90% of people who never will be affected by this bill, one way or the other, except if this bill passes without the amendment, they would be affected because not interest rates, but rental rates would go up and up and up and make their housing less attainable, less affordable, and less available. So this amendment seeks to strike a balance. It simply says to the landlords, you will get your day in court. It will come within a reasonable period of time. And it says to the folks facing eviction that, in fact, you will have time to get there. And here's the thing. If you should not be able to cure in the extended time that is made available under this amendment, if you should not be able to cure, that in fact then you will not have that blemish chasing you around as a scarlet letter. In fact, this makes it illegal, this amendment does, for someone to use that information in an adverse way against someone who would seek to rent an apartment in the future. Now, the reality is the information will be out there. Let's be candid about that. However, it's still illegal based on what will go into the red letter books or the red books and the black and white letter of the law for someone to use that information against someone who is seeking to rent an apartment in the future. It's challenging, this particular concept, this particular idea. But you know what? If we care about all of the folks who are seeking to rent an apartment, to find that first step on the economic ladder, to put a roof over their head and their family's head, this amendment helps strike an important balance, and I urge broadly, across the aisle, support for this amendment.
Any further discussion on Amendment 037? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L 037. A division has been called. The division has been requested. All those in the chamber not entitled to vote, please be seated. The motion before the body is the adoption of L037 to House Bill 1118. All those in favor, please stand. Thank you. Please be seated. All those opposed, please stand. L037 is lost. To the bill, Senator Lundin.
Members, thank you to your attention to the ongoing debate. That was what I perceive to be an offer at a pretty good balance. This balance isn't quite as good of a balance, but it's still yet another way of approaching balance in this bill. I would offer to you, and I move L038. It is at the desk.
Yes, Mr. Carpenter, please read L038.
Amendment L038, House Bill 1118 by Senator Lundin.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank the bill sponsor again for engaging in this ongoing conversation about making this bill better. So in the bill, as it's written right now, it's moved. I'll make clear that L038 is moved.
Thank you, Senator Lundin.
Request that it be moved.
It has been moved again. Thank you.
All right. I'll move it a third time if it gets me any closer to the correct number of votes here. I move it a third time at the advice of my colleagues. In all seriousness, this seeks to find a balance that we did not achieve in the previous amendment. This simply says the clock starts ticking. We've got a trigger day in the bill. It used to be, or currently is, 3 days. So you're in an apartment. You've got a waiver period. You've got a grace period of typically 4 or 5 days before anyone can say you're in trouble. You know you're in trouble because you haven't paid the rent. Once you get past that grace period, your landlord has a number of days. Currently it's 3 days that they must wait before they can put a notice on your door that says you're behind, you're beyond the grace period, you now have a limited number of days. Currently that limited number of days is 3. This bill would make it 10. Now keep in mind, what happens at the end of that period is that's just the notice that it's happening, and then you head towards a court hearing. So there's still more time before you get into court. What this balance is, what we're seeking to do here, is to protect the interests of the tenant, the individual who's in the home, who's in the apartment, and the landlord, to make sure that we both know when that time is happening and that it's a reasonable period of time. The bill says make that 10 days. So you get your grace period, then you get your 10 days, then in fact you have got an eviction notice, which is a trigger date, and then you move to court following that. This bill, or this amendment, L038, simply would make that day smaller, from 10 days to 7 days. Still 4 days more than what's in the current law, so we're still expanding that. We are seeking to find that balance, but it's 3 days less than what's in the re-engrossed bill. So in the pursuit of balance, I urge your support of L038.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, I ask for a no vote on L038. I ask you not to reduce from 10 to 7 days. We have heard from organizations where our tenants may need assistance, and it is exactly 10 days is what is needed to help those who may need assistance. We heard from the Action Center, who provides funding when assistance is available. From the time they take the initial appointment and when the landlord receives the checks, can take a minimum of 10 days. I feel as though if we reduce this to 7 days, we are not helping tenants who may need financial assistance. I think 10 days is still clear. 10 days is enough. It's helping those. We don't want people to go into poverty or into homelessness. And so I ask you for a no vote on L038.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you consider this, we're talking about 3 days here. As you consider this, I ask that you consider the nearly 400,000 different family units who are in apartments, not in the condition this bill is narrowly defined. It's a limited, very limited number of people that this bill is working to help, and that's commendable. But consider the nearly 400,000 other families whose rent is likely to be driven up by virtue of these expansive regulations that would be put in place. I urge you to consider those folks as you consider your vote on L038.
Is there any further discussion on L038? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L038. All those, and a division has been requested. A division has been requested. All those in the chamber not entitled to vote, please be seated. Are we ready?
You don't need to wait for us. It doesn't change, the crowd doesn't change.
Crowder's not going to help me. You voted against us last time. It's going to help me. I think he's actually smoking a cigar. It could be half an hour.
Yeah, they're raising rents, yep, and was very explicit about it.
Active economy is basically what he argued. An active economy is good. That was the argument.
Okay. Yeah. And I even went on to say, I said, because of that, it demands that we focus on the challenges out by it, including what this bill is designed to address.
So you think that this bill, the way it is right now, it is a disadvantage to landlords? It's problematic?
I actually don't think it's problematic for landlords. I think, because landlords, they just serve it. So let's say
Once again, a division has been requested. All those in the chamber not entitled to vote, please be seated. The motion before us is the adoption of L038 to House Bill 1118. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand. Thank you. Please be seated. All those opposed, please stand. Thank you. Please be seated. The motion for the adoption of L038 is lost. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, thank you for this conversation. I just want to reiterate that we are not trying to harm landlords with 1118. We just want to try to balance the scales of justice. We want to give people the opportunity to stay in their homes. We do not need poverty. We do not need homelessness. And this bill will help us here in Colorado to reduce the eviction rate across the state. Just having a filing on your record, even when it is later dismissed, can make it impossible to secure housing in the future. In 2018, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment was $1,432, up 79% since 2010. Statewide rent prices are up more than 50%. Even without an eviction on the record, it is increasingly difficult to find housing. A recent poll showed that 60% of voters statewide agree that we are in a housing crisis in their communities, and 40% strongly agree. 43% of the millennials and 36% of rurals agree. We are in an expensive housing market for both renters and homeowners, with record profits for developers. Since 2014, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in this state has risen 22.4%. That's twice the nationwide increase. We want working families. They should be able to afford housing, still give enough money to pay for the basics like food and clothing and health care. We need to make sure that housing in Colorado is available to everyone. And I would ask you for an aye vote on House Bill 1118.
Senator Fields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've been talking on the sidelines with my colleague from Colorado Springs. And he reminded me about my statement that I made about this is a good problem to have. And through that clarification and that conversation, I just want to make it clear that what he was saying is that he believes that the economy in the state of Colorado is strong. We have an active economy. It's strong. And because of that, we do have a rising cost as it relates to rental property. That's the good problem. The bad problem is that some folks can afford the rising rates of rental property. So I just wanted to make that clear that we are a strong economy, and because we have a strong economy, people are moving to the state of Colorado. Property values are up, and when you have property values that are up, so is rental property. But the problem still exists that we have far too many people who can't afford housing in the state of Colorado. I'm not quite sure what the average rental property is in Colorado, but I understand the average home might be starting at, what, $300,000? And when you think about rental property right now, the average rent I read in Denver is probably around, what, $1,800 a month, something like that. And so what people are having to do oftentimes is they have to get more than one person to occupy that rental space to be able to make ends meet. So it is a problem that we do need to address, and I think that this House bill does exactly that. So members, please vote yes on House Bill 1118.
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to say thanks to the previous speaker for clarifying that. We have good problems and we have bad problems. The good problem is we have a strong economy. which is driving cost up, which is making it's creating opportunity for a lot of folks, but it's making the housing problem more difficult. The bad problems that I think we seek to address, and I'll argue later on that this bill doesn't do it, is eviction is a bad problem to have, is non-payment is a bad problem to have, is the tension between landlords and tenants is a bad problem to have, and I worry that we're actually making that problem worse with this bill.
Senator Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are fantastic landlords out there. There are people who, when a tenant is late on their rent, they call them up and they say, hey, you're late on your rent, what's the story? They listen, they find a way to get back on track. There are excellent landlords out there. But if all humans were angels, we wouldn't need government. This bill is to make it clear and fair for both landlords and tenants exactly what the expectations are. Moreover, this bill helps people stay in their homes. And we know that when people stay in their homes, they need fewer government services. This bill is a fiscally responsible bill. It is rare in the legislature that we can do something that both saves the state money and is good for the people of this state in a morally righteous way. This bill is good fiscal policy, it is good moral policy, and I ask for an aye vote.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's interesting about this bill is that it's so much like other legislation we have down here. We have serious, important, and I would say kind of anecdotal challenges that we see with individuals and families struggling economically. And then we have legislation that's a blunt instrument that affects everybody in the class. In this case, everyone that has a tenant-landlord relationship. And so I appreciate the comments from my friend from Greenwood Village. Yes, there are landlords that are great. I would actually argue, based on the testimony and my knowledge of the industry, I would say the overwhelming majority of landlords work with tenants. Why? The costs of losing a tenant are extremely high. No landlord wants to lose a tenant willy-nilly. And so the incentive structures are really aligned to have landlords keep tenants as best they can. But again, I recognize the anecdotal challenges that are always present in issues like this and other legislation we have this year. I do want to offer maybe a Debbie Downer comment. I don't really think that this bill will lower eviction rates. Two main reasons. I think if you think about the reasons for an eviction, they're either non-economic or economic. The non-economic ones would be like a tenant who's causing damage, causing disruption, a threat to other tenants, things like that. They're going to get evicted. And it's just a matter of, by law, we're just putting that off. And then the second example, in terms of economic reasons, there's a lot of data, if you look nationally, that this kind of a tolling period of eviction doesn't really change eviction rates. It really just comes down to economic challenges that people have that aren't solved within a 1 week period. I will say I'm very appreciative of the senator from Denver accepting an amendment related to homeowners and landlords that own very few properties. The reality is they're most likely fully leveraged and renting that property out, and any disruption from a tenant's ability in terms of a tenant's ability to pay and willingness to pay puts them in financial jeopardy in terms of making mortgage payments on the property. And so I have a strong appreciation for my colleagues from Denver's sensitivity toward that. We heard a lot about that in committee. Anyways, just want to share my thoughts on the bill, and I guess ultimately, as you might ascertain, I'll be voting no on the bill. Thank you.
Senator Marble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, it's bills like these. This is a classic reason why I will never own rental property. The government's involvement in business transactions has gone far beyond what is necessary. It's almost becoming tyrannical in a lot of ways. it's stated that this bill creates relief. And I ask, for who? Is the property owner responsible for the tenant unable to make rent? For the tenant's economic status? No, he's not. Does the tenant have any sort of feelings of the position he put the landlord or the property owner in for now delaying money coming in for that rent? So that takes away from the landowner being able to pay mortgages, to pay property tax, and the ability to protect his property, which is what I'm going to get into now, because when you let somebody stay in your home because you can't evict them, are you aware, you've certainly come out for the person who is in there and how he should be able to stay in there, but do you know what they can do to that property when they stay in there? I'm going to tell you, because across the canal from where I live, an unfortunate property owner went through almost 9 months trying to get a person evicted. Well, it was more than one person, but one was on the lease, out of the home. During that time, the gas and the heat was turned off. So what did the people do? They went out and they started cutting down the trees that had been there before I even moved into my property, which was 47 years ago. They cut them down and they were burning them, and they set up a makeshift gas apparatus into the house, to which when I was out feeding my horses, fire started screaming out of the side of the house. I called the fire department. We didn't know if the makeshift gas line or whatever had gone awry, or if the house was going to be burned down. They did occasionally open and close their garage door, to which you got a great view of what was inside that garage, which was over a year's worth of trash. Weeds were rampant. The house used to be a really nice place. By the time the renters got done and were evicted from the house, it took the people who owned that house a year and a half to get it back to where it was livable again. When people rent your house, a lot of times, even though they are not allowed to have pets, they bring in pets. And this is another story to which I know you've heard time and time again, and we have problems with this here at the Capitol, we see, is pets who come in and urinate and defecate on the carpets and floors, and they're never cleaned up. The trash builds up, not just in the garage, but inside of the house. And who's going to take care of that? It's the landlord. The landlord. The landlord that put their money and their risk into buying this property, so hopefully they could make a little income to live off of, and the property value hopefully would increase. So if they sold it, they would be able to have some sort of retirement. Properties are bought with an investment in mind. But the way that we treat property owners here in the state of Colorado, I know that a lot of these owners of rental property are selling, and I do not blame them. Government is more responsible for creating homelessness than any property owner. And yet you are making the property owner responsible to take care of these people that the government created. Is this going to help government to force landlords into renting their property out to people who really can't afford it? Yeah, government loves to get some release of people on the street. But I think government created that problem. This is not a good bill, and this is not the role of government. Have a little heart for the person who's putting out their life savings, their liberties, their work, their money to buy a place like this and then open it up to someone to rent. Have a little heart for them too. It goes both ways. I feel for those people who cannot afford it, but to go out and rent something that you yourself know you can't afford, that's a personal responsibility level. And this bill does not do anything for that. It does nothing to help the problem. It helps create a bigger problem. And I wish all renters could pay the rent. We all do. But let's look at why they can't, and let's not make property owners responsible for them not turning in their rent check. So I'm a hard no on this bill, and I ask you to really think about what you're doing.
Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm a sympathetic no, but one thing I forgot to mention, and it's kind of a trade-off on all these kinds of issues, is that in some ways we'll probably be slightly modifying the rental market by which deposits will increase nominally, possibly we'll see fewer quantities of rentals just based on the implicit costs of having tenants. And that's just a trade-off to keep in mind in all these things, whether it be the family leave bill or other things, is, or minimum wage issues. Are we happy with in the trade-off of a fewer quantity in the market for the balance of the quantity being different in some ways? I think it's better to have more rather than less, but that's just me. And thank you for your time.
Any further discussion on House Bill 1118? Yes, Senator Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I come down here as a renter because that's what I do. And as I understand the bill, we're going from 3 days to 10. Is that correct? I do not believe that this will impact the market. I think the only impact you're going to have is those people that were delinquent for 3 days may very well be 10 days. But the idea of a rental is to make sure that you know who your renters are. And that's why we have the application. So I just don't have a problem with this bill. 3 days is really not very long. And I think that, the people that I rent from here in Denver, I don't think that they have a problem with it either because there's very, very little turnover in the process. So I'm not sure, that how this is I don't think it'll affect the economy. I don't think it'll affect the rental problems. But I don't see that there's a big issue with 3 to 10. And, if the sponsor think that's going to help a certain amount of people, I cannot say. But normally in an established rentals, there is very, very little turnover. But I don't have a problem with the bill, and I'll be voting yes on it because I don't think it's an issue to, and actually to give a little bit more disclosure, I own 5 rentals, and it's problem free as long as you make sure who's getting in there. So I don't see why we're having an issue with this particular bill. It does not affect anything. As long as our economy continues to grow, population will come in. The real estate entities claim they like to keep a 7% vacancy on rentals, and that's what stabilizes it. As I understand it, homeowners, the cost of homeowners has dropped 2% on value, and the rentals will follow. I think this thing will stabilize, but only when the amount of vacant apartments exists. But I agree with the senator from Colorado Springs that this is a good problem to have. And, I appreciate the individual coming up and explaining the position. It was not detrimental at all to anybody. It's just the way the reality is right now. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hill.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I think we've actually had some really good discussion in here on seconds. I know that often doesn't happen. A lot of folks are paying attention, engaged on this front. I think there's some genuine concern that really what we're doing by the way the current bill is written is that we are shifting the burden. We're shifting the burden back further into the rental process, either at the application process or at the ongoing rent and payment or the amount that will be required for a security deposit, you name it. But this is, it's like a balloon. You squeeze on one side and that pressure is going to go somewhere else. And we're squeezing on the tail end of this in an eviction process, and it's going to expand elsewhere. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to offer Amendment 39. Amendment 39.
Hold on, Senator Hill. Amendment 39 is on the desk, and I'll ask Mr. Carpenter to read it and then for you to move it. Mr. Carpenter, please read L039.
Amendment L039, House Bill 1118 by
Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment 39.
It has been moved to the amendment. Senator Hill.
Mr. Chair, Amendment 39 addresses what I think is genuinely a serious policy deficiency in this bill, that we've inappropriately split up the idea of filing for an eviction and then the period of time before you actually have the hearing. And right now, we should be able to count in both of those times to be able to make a cure. The goal is to solve the problem. The goal is not to tilt the scales in favor of one or the other. The goal is to actually solve and mediate this problem. I think this policy approach actually does that. That it says you can cure both during the 7 days up until the eviction notice is filed, along with the other 14 days until which by law the answer is due, according to Section 1340.113. And it still clarifies you can't, if a cure is made, which is the goal, remember the goal, I think both sides have agreed, the goal is a cure. If a cure is made, that filing doesn't get to be used against you in future applications. It makes sense. It solves the problem. Colleagues, I ask for your support of Amendment 39.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, we've discussed this. We feel like 10 days is reasonable. 7 days is just not enough to help those in need. I'm just going to ask you for a no vote on this. We've discussed this, and we want to keep it at 10 days to be able to cure the rent. It clarifies it. It's not confusing to the renter and or the landlord, so I'll ask you for a no vote.
Senator Zinzinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually come down in support of this amendment, and here's why. I think 7 is a good compromise. I think what we've heard today is a good balanced discussion between, this is too much and this is not enough. And so I think we need to find something that kind of meets in the middle, that recognizes that not every landlord is a bad actor, that not every renter is a bad actor, that not every landlord is a good actor, and not every renter is a good actor as well. So we just have to recognize that the circumstances are different on both sides, and I think this is a good compromise of landing in the middle, of finding a way to definitely increase it beyond 3, because 3 is too little. At the same time, 10 is too much. So I would be in favor of landing on a compromise. 7 days is a week. I think that that's good. I also really believe that this section B here of this amendment is really critical. I want to make sure that people that are experiencing an unfortunate event, maybe a medical emergency or something in which they just are having difficulty that particular month, but they find a way to cure, I don't want that coming back on them and making it more difficult for them to find housing in the future. I would like it so that there is no adverse credit action. What if they couldn't cure, even though they were given the extra time, and they weren't able to cure? Then it's going to be very hard for them to find housing. But if they were able to do it, I wouldn't want this negatively affecting their credit for everything else in their life when they managed to find a way to cure. So this second half, Section B, I think is really important. I don't want to have this kind of thing hang over the tenants' heads if they're able to cure. So I would ask for an aye vote.
Is there any further discussion on L039? The question before us then is the adoption of L039. A division has been requested. All those in the chamber not entitled to vote, please be seated. Members of the division has been requested. All those in the chamber not entitled to vote, please be seated. The motion before us currently is the adoption of L039 to House Bill 1118. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand. Thank you. Please be seated. All those opposed, please stand. Thank you. Please be seated. L039 is lost. To the bill. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, I want to thank everyone on both sides of the aisle for the conversation and the perspectives on House Bill 1118. And just keep in mind that we're trying to keep families out of poverty. We're trying to keep them out of homelessness. We're trying to be reasonable. We are not trying to punish landlords. We are just trying to give tenants an additional time if they face a financial loss or some type of emergency. So I'll ask you for an aye vote on House Bill 1118.
Is there any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1118. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The ayes have it. House Bill 1118 is adopted. Mr. Carpenter, please read the title of Senate Bill 196.
Senate Bill 196 by Senators Lee and Danielson concerning modification of procurement requirements for state contracts for public projects.
Thank you. Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Guests in the chamber and out in the lobby, it's nice to see you here today. Today we come before you with Senate Bill 196. And I'm going to keep my remarks brief and defer to my colleague, Senator Pete Lee, who's been working on these similar issues for a long time. But I will just say that my investment in this bill is driven by a commitment to the hardworking folks all across the state. Construction workers literally build our communities. And for that, we are grateful. And we want to do right by the workers who build up our communities. We want to do right by the families that they have to provide for. We want to do right for their job security and their future. And part of that is ensuring the best wages possible for this kind of difficult work, safety on the job, an investment in apprenticeships and building for the future, and providing these hardworking Coloradans with enough to provide for their families. And we've got that in Senate Bill 196. And I hope that you'll consider an aye vote on this important measure for the hardworking folks all across the state.
And, sorry, Senator Danielson, even though we've heard this bill at least partially before, you still need to move the bill in order for us to actually technically discuss it. Senator Danielson, could you just move the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Senate Bill 196.
All right, thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just as a reminder, we were talking about this bill on Friday, and the bill was significantly modified from its original form. So the bill that we are considering is the strike below that was passed out of the State Veteran Military Affairs Committee. The original purpose of this bill was to provide apprentice training programs, but during the course of those discussions with the stakeholders, including the Colorado contractors and the associated general contractors, the people that build the things in Colorado, a proposal was put on the table. All the unions were in that room at the same time, craft unions, AFL-CIO, and the discussion revolved around a proposal from the contractors to have a statewide Davis-Bacon prevailing wage. And Senator Danielson and I collaborated over the implications of that, and ultimately the implications of that are extraordinarily good, both for the state, which gets high-quality projects built by skilled labor. It also raises the wages of employees throughout the state. The advantages of doing this are both in the present and in the future. The Davis-Bacon prevailing wage law provides that employers have to make contributions to health and welfare plans, to vacation plans, to pension plans, and significantly, from my standpoint, to apprentice training programs. What I have been hearing ever since I've been at the Capitol is that we have a tremendous statewide shortage of skilled trades. We have contractors across the state who do not have the capability to complete projects or even bid on projects because they don't have enough pipe fitters and welders and plumbers and electricians and sheet metal workers and cement finishers and mechanical equipment operators. What the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage law does is require contributions to apprentice programs. What this bill will do will build the workforce of the future for the state of Colorado. So I urge your support for this bill.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, excuse me just a moment. An amendment is at the desk. Senator Danielson.
Thank you,
And Mr. Carpenter, please read L005.
Amendment L005 to Summary 196 to Senators Lee.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment L005.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been, like I said from the beginning, working with a number of different interests, and in an effort to make this bill more easily accommodating to some of the interests at the table, we needed to make some significant changes in the amount of money, the basic, the lowest level of money that would qualify a contract for under the bill. And so we've changed that and we've raised it substantially. And I will let Senator Lee add anything that he'd like, but I urge an aye vote on Amendment L005.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The floor of the bill as initially proposed was $50,000. So all contracts over $50,000 would be required to be in compliance with the bill. After listening to some of the major builders around the state, the universities that have projects, we acquiesced to the request of higher education primarily and agreed that the floor for the contracts will be $500,000. And I'm told with this amendment that we have the support of CU and CSU on this bill as a result of this amendment. So we would urge an aye vote for 005.
Any further discussion on L005? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L005. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. L005 is adopted. Back to the bill.
So we would urge an aye vote on the bill.
Further discussion on the bill. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On Friday last, I believe my colleague from El Paso County, who is a sponsor of this bill, came down, and I don't want to misquote him, but there was some comment that this was a collaborative effort of the construction trades and the contractors, and they all agreed on this, and it was a great moment of coming together. And I don't think, because it was second reading, everybody's talking, anyone heard me exclaim back there when he said that, "Of course they did. Of course they did." And why did they do that? Because the one stakeholder that needed to be at the table was not at the table, as is so often the case in legislative decisions. Who is that stakeholder? The taxpayers of Colorado. Because what this does by requiring what is essentially Davis-Bacon wages under the federal Davis-Bacon Act is to drive up the cost of every construction project covered. And what we've had since Friday is a revised fiscal note. You might take it out. I invite my friends over here on this side of the aisle, if you're going to vote for this bill, at least take a look at the fiscal note. $34 million additional dollars. Now, I understand there may be some disagreement about whether the analysts got this right as to whether 10% was the right number, or 7% or 5%. Chop it down if you want and call it $20 million. The fact of the matter is, this bill is going to make every construction project covered for our state universities, our non-CDOT projects, every one of them more expensive. Now, I don't think that by and large construction contractors are big fans of Davis-Bacon, but I have to tell you, if they're sitting at the table and they all have to bid against Davis-Bacon wages, they just know what they need to do. They just bid for a little more, and that's a bit more revenue to their company, and that all kind of works out for them. Members, just know that what you're voting on is higher construction cost for every project in the state of Colorado. Now, there's another piece to the bill. Now, what I just talked about is a reason to vote no on the bill altogether. But if you are going to vote yes on the bill, I would say this. The bill also requires certification, and the bill really is the strike below. It's the State Veterans and Military Affairs Committee report. And what it requires for these contracts is that the general contractor that's awarded the contract document to the contracting organization, the agency, the state, identifies that the subcontractors will be used for all the trades, and certifies that all the firms identified to participate in apprenticeship programs registered with the Department of Labor and Employment have a proven record, and this is to require these subcontractors to have workers who've participated in an apprenticeship program. Okay. Good enough. There's only one problem with it. There are places in our state, rural areas in particular, less populous areas, in which there are not apprenticeship programs that workers can go to, that they can do their job and go and get there in a reasonable time in the evening to do the apprenticeship program. Now, there is a request for waiver provision in the strike below at page 2 and 3. And they can request a waiver of these apprenticeship, worker apprenticeship requirements, but it's very restrictive. That's why I'm going to offer an amendment.
And amendment is at the desk. Mr. Carpenter, please read L006.
Amendment L006, number 196.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you. I move L006.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So L006 says that the request for a waiver for workers in these trades to have attended an apprenticeship program, that the agency, the state, shall grant the waiver if the public project is in an area of the state where registered apprenticeship programs are not available within a reasonable distance for apprentices to participate in after their workday. Otherwise, we're going to lock out people in these trades who have projects in rural areas that would provide work for them, and someone will come from Denver or Colorado Springs or Greeley or Fort Collins. They'll come to the Western Slope or out on the Eastern Plains to build that state project because these folks won't be qualified because they live in a rural area and don't have an apprenticeship program. Another waiver requirement would be if there are not more than 2 subcontractors available that satisfy the requirements for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing portions of the public project. This is a good amendment because it accounts for rural Colorado. It accounts for smaller contractors. It is only for those where there's not a program within a reasonable distance that can be attended by these workers. I ask for an aye vote on L006.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Gardner, for talking about the waiver and the requirements of a waiver. As you correctly pointed out, there is waiver in the bill right now. We don't think it's necessary to expand the waiver provision, and so we would ask for a no vote on the Gardner amendment. In addition, I would note that the amendment proposed by the good senator from El Paso County has a loophole through which a large contractor truck could be driven through. The last provision says that a contracting agency may waive the requirement even if the contractor does not request a waiver. So I think it's a little broad. I have talked with our contractor friends about the waiver language in the bill, and they're prepared subsequently, after the bill passes, to talk about the possibility of a waiver. In addition, all of these bills will be subject to rule making, and we can certainly take a look at what waiver language ought to be. I think the El Paso senator's waiver is a little broader than we are comfortable with, so we ask for a no vote on the Amendment 006.
Senator Gardner.
Thank you. Well, there's no doubt that L006 is a somewhat broader waiver. I am carrying this amendment because major general contractors in our own El Paso County requested this because they are concerned that the current waiver in the strike below is too narrow and too rigid. For that reason, I ask for an aye vote on L006.
Any further discussion on L006? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L006. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The noes have it. L006 is lost. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the bill sponsors. The one part of the bill I think I'm interested in or sympathetic with is the apprenticeship program aspect. And is there a reason why the apprenticeship programs are restricted just to a couple trades versus all trades? As being a former construction professional, I have a lot of appreciation for how some trades are more technical in nature, some more dealing with hand skills. And are all trades available for the apprenticeship programs? I'm looking at the carpenters union out there and asking if they're included or not, and if so, or if not, why not?
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The bill is reasonably expansive in the inclusion. What we want to do is to include the MEP, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing contractors. They were the largest group. We are certainly willing to talk about expanding the bill to include other trades along the way, but right now the bill is as it is. But we are interested in having further discussions as the bill moves forward. We realize the carpenters are an important part of the building trades, and we want them to also have access.
Senator Sonnenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'll be very brief. We had the state architect speak to us in regards to the cost of this just alone on the state buildings. And yes, he said there would be an increase. Didn't know what it is. Your fiscal note shows up to about a 10% increase. But let me tell you what that equates to as far as the capital that we spend our money on in capital development. Currently, we funded through prioritization number 12 this year. If this bill were in effect this year, and the assumptions were correct, we would have to then go to line 9. It would be the last line that we funded, which means the Department of Personnel and Administration, their historical property rehabilitation, would not have been funded. The Auraria Higher Education Center, which has several campuses down there at the Auraria Center, to replace the heating and hot water system, a capital renewal project, gone. Colorado School of Mines, their Frontiers building, gone. So if indeed we're going to pay the cost of higher expensive buildings, let's understand what's going to be cut. Let's understand what impact it will have. Because I don't care where you draw the line on the list, next year, 5 to 10% of those projects will be eliminated because you have to move the line to adjust for the additional cost. Members, this is not being a good steward of our money. So you have to ask the question, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Do we currently have safety issues in building these state buildings? The answer is no. Are we currently having substandard contractors do the work and have substandard completed projects? The answer is No. So you have to ask yourself, what solution this bill is providing for what problem? I know the answer. I think you do too, without me saying it publicly. Let's be good stewards of the money. Vote no on Senate Bill 196.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Have you ever walked into a movie 10 minutes late? You don't know what's going on. You missed the first act. You don't know who the characters are. You don't know what the plot is. You don't know how things are developing. You have to hurry to catch up. You have to run to catch up. I kind of felt that way on this bill when I got the new fiscal note this morning. $34 million. And the argument is, of course, all the stakeholders were involved except one. And the stakeholders that were at the table, I've done contracting in my past. I've done time and materials contracts. I've done cost plus contracts. And of course, if you increase the basis of the work I'm doing, and I've got a contract that says I'm going to get 15% for overhead and another 10% for profit, and that number is going to get expanded, I'm going to say, sure, let the number get bigger. The challenge is the taxpayers are missing out on that. And it's our job to provide their voice to this conversation and say, what is the most efficient way? What is the safest way? What is the best way to get this done? And you heard the previous speaker, the good senator from, we'll call it the northeast quarter of Colorado, just spoke to this. We don't have safety problems. We don't have efficiency problems. What are we trying to solve here? And how much are we willing to spend to do it? I feel like I'm racing to catch up to this train, this pink sheet that showed up on my desk this morning that said $34 million more. And I'm not willing to jump on that train. I do not think that is an appropriate use of the taxpayers' dollars. So I urge your opposition to this particular bill, Senate Bill 196.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I very much appreciate the dialogue and comments of my colleagues on this bill. What we're trying to do is invest in the future. That's really what we're looking at. We want to train workers for the future so that Colorado can still build the infrastructure that it needs going forward. Over the past few years, we have had $750 million worth of low bid contracts. Low bid contracts do not provide any investment in apprentice training programs. If the state is going to spend money to build things, I would like to see the state spend some of that money to train the workforce of the future. I think we have an obligation as legislators, as taxpayers, to look to the future. I would contest the $34 million set forth in the bill. First, I would note it's not in the upcoming year, it's a year away, but I think the fiscal note misses the mark in a couple of respects. One, despite the fact that we have an amendment that raised the contracting amount from $50,000 floor to $500,000 floor, the fiscal note is still premised on the idea of a $50,000 public project. Also, and even more significantly, the estimate of $30+ million is based on 5 to 10% increase in cost on the public projects. And the fiscal analyst took the entire budget for the fiscal project. In fact, only 20% of a project is labor cost. So only 20% of the project should be subject to the potential escalator of 5 to 10%. I would also suggest that the recitation of a 5 to 10% increase in cost was a wag, a wild guess, that it was not a specific precise estimate of the additional amount. So I would, again, urge a aye vote for this bill and look forward to moving forward with it. Thank you.
Is there any, yes, Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we need to remember what the basic implications of this bill include. And what we're doing with the prevailing wage component of the bill is leveling the playing field for all contractors, so that it's no longer a race to the bottom to see who can compete for the lowest wages to pay these critical workers. Prevailing wage benefits all of us: the workers' wages, job safety, on-the-job training, efficiency in using better trained workers. It makes better products. And we're doing right by the hardworking construction workers all across the state. If we need to do more to try and be more inclusive on the apprenticeship utilization piece, they have my commitment to work towards that goal. We're doing our best. But what we have in front of us is an extraordinary tool to lift up these hardworking construction workers all across the state. While we're facing a tremendous workforce shortage, this bill addresses that. If we ignore the work shortage, it'll be an exponential increase to the cost of the taxpayer. We will have qualified, dedicated people building these projects and hired right here in Colorado. Senate Bill 196 will lift up construction workers all across the state, and it's an investment in the future for the quality of the projects that the state engages in. And I urge your aye vote on this bill.
Senator Lundin.
So I would rejoin that conversation, the conversation that says that by introducing the Davis-Bacon, the prevailing wage component to this, it's not a race to the bottom. And I would say what it is a race to less. The answer is there are projects that will not get done now. With the finite resources that the state has, the capital expenditures budget, the intentions to spend money that we have, it means we're going to do less instead of do more with less. The reality is we're just going to do less. And that is a significant and important perspective that the taxpayers deserve to hear about, deserve us to represent, and deserve us to fight for. We should be doing more with less, not doing less for the taxpayers of Colorado. I, again, rejoin the effort to urge opposition to 196.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my colleagues. I just have to respectfully disagree. There's dozens, literally 40 different studies from this same kind of legislation from all across the country that prove that when prevailing wage laws are enacted to protect the workers and lift them up, it does not result in higher costs in construction projects. There's no data to show that prevailing wage increases construction costs. We're investing in these workers, we're investing in quality product, we're investing in on-the-job training, we're investing in apprenticeship utilization. We can't do without this kind of protection. Thank you.
Senator Lundin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You must have read the thought bubble across the top of my head. I was not actually thinking about coming back in, but I was feeling compelled to come back in and say exactly this. I've been on both sides of this project. I've been a contractor. I've been a contractor that paid market rates, and I've been a contractor that paid prevailing federal rates. The reality is, when you pay the bigger rates, you get less bang for your buck. The work doesn't change, the product doesn't change, the end of the project doesn't change. What happens is you get less for the people who've hired you to do the work. And in this case, the conversation is, who's hired us to do the work? The people of Colorado. And what are they calling us to do? Get more done with less on a daily basis, because that's what they're doing with their family budgets. That's what they're doing with their business budgets. They expect us to do the same. This bill turns from that idea of doing more with less and walks away with our back to the taxpayers of Colorado. I am increasingly vigorous in my opposition to 196.
Is there any further discussion on Senate Bill 196? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Senate Bill 196. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 196 is adopted. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
Seeing no objection, the committee will rise and report.
The committee will come back to order. Senator Foote.
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee has met and had a number of bills under consideration. Will the clerk please read the report?
Mr. President, your committee will the reports that are in consideration of the following text bills being second reading thereof makes the following recommendation on Senate Bill 196 is amended passed second reading order gross place counted for their bringing in final passage. House Bill 1118 is amended passed second reading order rise place counted for their bringing in final passage.
Senator Foote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the report. The adoption of the report.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The motion is adopted and the Senate will resolve itself. Senate will resolve itself. The committee of the whole report. The motion is the adoption of the committee of the whole report. Are there any no votes? With 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, the committee of the whole report is adopted. Senate Bill 169 is amended, passed on second reading, and ordered engrossed and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 1118, as amended, passed on second reading, and ordered revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Members, would you please join me in recognizing Senator Betty Boyd, Representative Sue Schaefer, and Senator Andy Kerr, who are here with us today. Consideration of conference committee reports. Will the clerk please read the title to House Bill 1170?
House Bill 1170 by Representatives Jackson, Weissman, Senators Williams, and Bridges concerning increasing tenant protections relating to the residential warranty of habitability.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adopt the first report of the first conference committee on House Bill 1170.
Is there any discussion? Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. And members, we had a conversation in the conference committee. We were having, mold is a very difficult issue. And so what we did is we moved the notification of the repairs from 24 hours to 96 hours after a landlord has completed the written electronic notice. And then we made some adjustments, of course, to any of those properties that might be funded through federal low-income tax housing credits or any type of tax credits. I ask you for to passage of House Bill 1170.
Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the motion is the adoption of the first report for the first conference committee on House Bill 1170. Are there any no votes? With a vote of 35 ayes, 0 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, the first report of the First Conference Committee on House Bill 1170 is adopted. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I move for the repassage of House Bill 1170 and ask you for an aye vote.
The motion is for the repassage of House Bill 1170. Are there any no votes? Senators Sonnenberg, Heisey, Woodward, Smallwood, Cook, Scott, Minority Leader, Hill, Marble, Crowder, Tate, Rankin, Gardner, Coram, Lundin. With a vote of 20 ayes, 15 noes, 0 absent, and 0 excused, House Bill 1170 is repassed. Co-sponsors. Message from the Governor.
Thursday, April 11, 2019, Colorado Senate. Honorable members of the Colorado Senate, pursuant to the authority vested in the office of the Governor of the State of Colorado, I have the honor to inform you that I have approved and filed with the Secretary of State the following acts: Senate Bill 129, Regulation of Online Schools, approved April 10, 2019 at 2:29 p.m. Senate Bill 203, Fiscal Year 2019-20 Legislative Appropriation Bill, approved April 10, 2019 at 2:40 p.m. Sincerely, Jared Polis, Governor. Friday, April 12, 2019, Colorado Senate. Honorable members of the Colorado Senate, pursuant to the authority vested in the office of the Governor of the State of Colorado, I have the honor to inform you that I have approved and filed with the Secretary of State the following acts: Senate Bill 147, Sunset Seed Potato Grower Regulation, approved April 12, 2019, 11:22 a.m. Senate Bill 151, Sunset Emergency Planning Subcommittee, approved April 12, 2019, 11:34 a.m. Senate Bill 6, Electronic Sales and Use Tax Simplification System, approved April 12, 2019, 11:40 a.m. Senate Bill 76, CDOT Colorado Department of Transportation Consulting Engineer Contracts, approved April 12, 2019, 11:25 a.m. Senate Bill 152, Sunset Public Safety Communications Subcommittee, approved April 12, 2019, 11:36 a.m. Senate Bill 148, Sunset Processed Seed Potato Advisory Committee, approved April 12, 2019, 11:24 a.m. Sincerely, Jared Polis, Governor.
Announcements. Senator Todd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Happy Tax Day. Hope everyone has their taxes in and are done on time. You have till midnight. I just want to remind you again, as soon as we get off the floor, to come up to room 352 to learn a little bit more about the safe disposal of prescription drugs. So come up to 352 to the policy roundtable to learn how to dispose of drugs that you no longer need in your home. Thank you.
Senator Zenzinger.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate Appropriations Committee, you should have received your revised fiscal note for Senate Bill 188 on your desk today. And since we received this revised fiscal note for Senate Bill 188, it will be on the calendar tomorrow morning on the appropriations calendar, along with House Bill 1031, 1095, 1205, along with Senate Bill 1536, 96, 108, 136, 149, 156, 165, 173, 175, 176, 180, 190, 191, 195, 198, 199, 205, 215, 218, 224, and 235. And we will be meeting at 7:30 a.m. So see you in the morning.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Senate Business, Labor, and Technology Committee, we will meet today at 1:30. We have several hearings on appointees. We will hear House Bill 19-1210 and Senate Bill 107. We will see you at 1:30 in room 354.
Senator Danielson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just wanted to take a brief minute. Over in the House this morning, they did a very nice memorial to Representative Gwen Green, who we lost in the interim. I don't know if many of you served with her, but Representative Green was one of my predecessors and a real mentor to me. And it was my honor to even get to know her, let alone work with her and benefit from her support and her guidance. And I would have liked to have participated in the memorial over there this morning, and I'm sure a number of you would have as well. She didn't serve in the Senate, so we can't honor her here in the same manner, but I can't sum up in 2 minutes how much I cared for her, but probably more importantly, the impact that she had on the state and very acutely in the Jefferson County community. When she took the time to listen to me and then ended up supporting me my first run, it meant something personally because I held her so high on a pedestal and respected her so greatly, but it also impacted my race because the electorate respects and trusts her still. And her word really meant something because she earned it. And the integrity that she had and kindness and warmth, and she was an effective leader, and it's something that I will always strive to live up to. And so I guess I would ask if you knew Representative Green, just say hi to her husband Dan and offer your condolences to their family. It was a tough loss. And if we could, Mr. President, please take a moment of silence and honor Representative Green.
Senator Danielson, if it's okay, the others wanting to speak on this, and then we'll observe the moment of silence at the end.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Senator Court.
Thank you, Mr. President. I request a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you. When I first came to the House, Representative Green was there, and she was so lovely and gracious to the new members. And I had known her previously when I was also here as an aide. But I remember when she was running for re-election, one of the pieces that went out said, "Vote for the fightin' granny." I wasn't quite as old then as I am now, so I thought, I wonder if that's really flattering. Well, folks, at this stage, I think it's really flattering. And she was a fightin' granny. She was a wonderful woman. We will all miss her very, very much. Thank you.
Is there other discussion? Senator Pedersen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for a moment of personal privilege.
Granted.
Thank you, Senator Danielson, for giving us this opportunity to highlight it. Gwen Green was actually the first campaign that my husband worked on, so maybe a bad thing for some people. But he worked for her in Jefferson County, and he always talked about, her, the type of leader that she was. When there was a check that came in on something she didn't disagree with, she would send it right back. The way that she always stood by her values was at every level. They did call her the fighting granny, and I remember when she showed up to my town hall when it was a controversial bill, and she was there to support us, and I remember her waving her cane up and yelling back at the person because she was fierce. But she was also somebody who valued her family and public service. And so I think that she has been somebody for all of us to look up to on what we should do in the time that we have here, and we will miss you, Gwen.
Having no further discussion, the Senate will renew Senator Danielson's request for a moment of silence, and the Senate chimes will be rung. Further announcements. Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, today is the Colorado Carpenters Day at the Capitol. You may have seen them walking around with their orange shirts. They're out having a rally on the West Steps today. These are the men and women who are building Colorado with their hands, and I want to take this moment of personal privilege to recognize their dedication to excellent craftsmanship. The Carpenters operate a state-of-the-art apprenticeship program, and several of those apprenticeships are here today to visit with you and learn more about the legislative process. So notice them with the orange shirts, and they brought burritos this morning too. I think.
Personal burrito.
Having no further announcements, Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate recess until 2 p.m. today.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the Senate will stand in recess until 1400 today.